Welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, helping you prepare for the PMP exam. Here's your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner.
Hello and welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, where we define the activities you'll need to complete in order to pass your PMP exam. I'm your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner. Yes, the topic of this lesson is the Define Activities process. The purpose of this process is to identify all the specific tasks that need to be done in order to produce your project's deliverables. We do this by breaking down or decomposing the work packages at the lowest level of your WBS and turning them into actual activities. We will also discuss the common types of progressive elaboration, one of them called rolling wave planning. We review how to create a complete list of schedule activities for a project, and we call that the activity list. We'll give you some examples of activity attributes, which are the specific components of a particular activity. And finally, we cover a list of any events in our schedule that will receive special attention. That's the milestone list. Do you still remember what project time management is all about? Well, here's our review of the knowledge area. Project time management, according to the PMBOK guide, includes the processes required to manage the timely completion of the project. And this is then accomplished by defining activities which are sequenced. We give them an approximate duration, we assign resources, and once we have all of that, we can develop a schedule that is then modified and executed over the project lifecycle. And for this, the PMBOK guide offers us 7 processes. The first one is Plan Schedule Management, the process of establishing the policies, procedures, and documentation for planning, developing, managing, executing, and controlling the project schedule. This tells us how we are going to manage time in our project. Once we have that, we need to define our activities. We need to figure out what it is we're going to have to do in order to deliver what we have to deliver. This is the process of identifying and documenting the specific actions to be performed to produce the project deliverables. Once you know what you're going to do, you can say in which order you're going to do this. This is the process of sequence activities, of identifying and documenting relationships among the project activities. Next, we want to assign resources and figure out how long all of this is going to take. Well, the first process to do this is estimate activity resources. The process of estimating the type and quantities of material, human resources, equipment, or supplies required to perform each activity. Once we know who is going to perform a certain activity in this process here, then we can sort of guesstimate how long it's going to take them, because we now know their skill level. So we can move on to the process of estimate activity durations. This is the process of estimating the number of work periods needed to complete individual activities with estimated resources. Now we know everything. We know what we're going to do, in which order we're going to do it, who's going to do it, and how long they are going to take doing it. Let's develop our schedule. In the develop schedule process, the process of analyzing activity sequences, durations, resource requirements, and schedule constraints to create the project schedule model. Now we have a schedule. We can start work on our project, and we can actually implement all those activities that we defined in the define activities process. But as things are being worked on, very likely there may be slippages in our schedule. We want to make sure that isn't going to happen, or at least that we can, minimize the impact. And that's what control schedule is for. The process of monitoring the status of project activities to update project progress and manage changes to the schedule baseline to achieve the plan. And into which process groups do all of these processes fall? Well, project time management is all about planning, because until you have your schedule finished and developed there in our 6th process of develop schedule, you are just planning. From there, we hand it off to project integration management, where the work is actually done. So that means that our first 6 processes here are all about planning, and only control schedule is in a different process group, in the process group of monitoring and controlling. But our focus right now is on the define activities process, which of course is also a planning process. The main concept that you have to understand for the define activities process is that the process decomposes or breaks down the work packages from the WBS into descriptions of the actual activities that we will be performing on our project. This means going through each and every one of the work packages in the WBS and determining what needs to be done. Keep in mind, work packages are at the lowest level in the WBS. Also note that the WBS is deliverables oriented. So your work packages may include items you may need, such as office-related supplies like chairs, desk, computers, or whatever you may need to produce on your deliverables. Ultimately, your task during the define activities process is to identify and document all the things you need to do in order to create the deliverables. These individual things that we identified are called schedule activities. And who do you think is most qualified to define all of these activities necessary to complete the work? Well, let's say you were hired as a new project manager for a cutting-edge research project, and the activities regarding the patent filing must be planned out. So who should define these steps? Should it be you? Should it be the project manager? Probably not. Even if by some chance you knew the basic filing steps for patents, you may not completely understand or be aware of some of the organization's internal procedures. So then maybe your core project management team could be working on these things and define what needs to be done. Well, probably not again. It's better to facilitate and delegate rather than attempting to do it all yourself and making assumptions that may not turn out to be true. The best answer is that the ones who actually will be doing the work should be defining the activities. These are your subject matter experts who know the most about the work that is necessary to complete a task. Granted, it may not be the exact person performing the work later on the project, but the knowledge and skills of a person in that role would be better suited at defining what must be done to complete the work. Include them in the definition of activities also builds team cohesiveness and understanding. Instead of you as the project manager guessing their work, or your core PM team making assumptions and again guessing, they, the people actually doing the work, participate and explain their work that is to be scheduled. Before digging into each of the inputs, tools, techniques, and outputs of this process, let's take a look at our overview here and remind ourselves, what again is it that we're doing? We're taking the WBS and we're breaking it down into the activities that need to be performed. So, our primary input is the scope baseline that contains the WBS. Our primary tool and technique is decomposition that allows us to break down the WBS. And our primary output is the activity list, all the things we need to do in order to complete our deliverables. In detail, the 4 inputs to our process are, first of all, the schedule management plan. This is essentially your guideline on how you should manage everything in this knowledge area. So how we define activities is also planned out in the schedule management plan. So we need the scope baseline because it consists of the project scope statement, the WBS, which we're going to be breaking down in just a moment, as well as the WBS dictionary. And we also have enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets that we need to take into considerations. Now let's take a closer look at why we need all of these 4 as inputs. The schedule management plan is an input to this process because it gives the project management team guidance in regards to the prescribed level of detail that is necessary to manage project work. So how much into detail are we going to have to go in regards to defining our activities? And this kind of information generally includes methods that are to be used in the defining of schedule activities, terms and definitions to assist the management team and place them all on the same page, references to any policies and procedures that may influence how we define activities, as well as documentation, general documentation of how to conduct schedule management activities throughout the project lifecycle. Remember, we developed the schedule management plan in the previous process, so let's pick it up once more in this process here and take a look what we said, what we planned out on how we're going to do things in the project time management knowledge area. The next input of the define activities process is the scope baseline. Remember, the scope baseline is not a single document. It consists of 3 components. It consists of the scope statement, the WBS, and the WBS dictionary. Now, the scope statement is important because it describes the project's deliverables and the major objectives of the project, as well as any assumptions and constraints that the project may have. So you want this as an input. It should also include a way to measure the criteria for success in your project. For example, what will be defined as success? Is there a client sign-off to the project? Or will it be when you complete the scope of the work? Just when you're done. That's success. Remember, there are many things that can come between you and the success of your project. The budget, the bureaucracy, or even the bad weather, just to name a few. So you want to document that, and the scope statement is usually the place to do this. Then the second party of the scope baseline is the WBS. This contains all of your work packages that you must deliver in order to complete the project. The work packages, again, at the lowest level of your WBS. We will take these components, these work packages, and then break them down into individual tasks, into schedule activities. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That will happen during the application of tools and techniques. We'll see that in just a bit. And of course we have the WBS dictionary, which describes the work packages in detail, including any technical specifications which may influence the type of work we need to perform in order to create the deliverables. Keep in mind that the main objective of this process is to identify the activities necessary to create our deliverables. Note the term deliverables. It's really just another name for scope. So we need to have a detailed scope description available if we want to figure out what steps are to be taken in order to produce the scope. The third input are the enterprise environmental factors. They are the conditions that are not under the immediate control of the project management team. For this process here, there could be general attitudes in your organization on how detailed activities have to be defined as. For example, a fast-paced enterprise with constantly changing plans and activities, well, acts far differently when it comes to defining activities than a government project, building a light rail transit over water that is expected to be completed 7 years from now. You can tell there's a different level of detail required for this light rail project there. Well, enterprise environmental factors may influence, constrain, or direct the project, program, or portfolio that you're working on. EEFs are an input because these factors can impact your project in a negative or positive way, and they may tell you how detailed or how exactly you have to define your activities. And the final input are the organizational process assets. As always, they are your company's policies and procedures. In particular, we're interested in the policies and procedures that the organization has for defining the activities. And remember, when we looked at our first input, the project management plan, they're referenced in there as well. So these policies and procedures, they may be formal, they may be informal. In addition, they may take the form of a guideline that is not necessarily written in stone, or they may be the policies that everyone in the organization must follow. Another organizational process assets is your company's historical information. This is important because it is always a good idea to go back and examine similar projects from the past and see what kind of activities were performed during any previous similar projects. Your company's historical information may include all the correspondence, the documents, files, and contracts that have been archived for future review. Look at it like this. A cookbook is a collection of successful cooking projects called recipes. If you wanted to cook one of these recipes, you would go to the bookshelf, take down the cookbook, open it to the appropriate page, and follow the steps as indicated, and voila, you will have created a delicious lasagna which you may then share with the 10 of your closest friends, making everybody happy. So why not apply the same good practices to our project? That's why the PMBOK guide suggests that you use your company's historical information sort of as a cookbook for your current project. And those were our 4 inputs and why we need them. Now let's go ahead and apply some tool and techniques to these inputs. In particular, we want to apply the tool and technique of decomposition, rolling wave planning, and expert judgment to our inputs. Our first tool and technique, decomposition, is a planning technique that subdivides the project scope and project deliverables into smaller, more manageable components until you have enough detail so that each piece of work can be prioritized, assigned resources to, and tracked. This planning technique takes the entire project scope and all project deliverables and breaks them down into smaller components. The idea is to move from large, general deliverables to the specific work packages and tasks that make up each deliverable. In essence, you're carving up the individual puzzle pieces that make up the puzzle as a whole. Just one word of caution: make sure that you're not spending more time decomposing, tracking, and managing the tasks than it would take to simply get the work done. After all, your job is to simplify and not to create more work. Often it is not possible to foresee the future activities in a project with any accuracy over the entire length of the project. And when this happens, planning is often done in stages, with the earlier activities planned in detail now, and the later activities often left for future detailed planning. In fact, there may be several planning stages, particularly if the activity or resource requirement is dependent on or conditioned on near-term activity. Such a planning approach is called rolling wave planning. Rolling wave planning is the process of planning in sequential stages or waves as the project moves forward, and later on only details become clearer. Any work done in the near term is detailed and reliable, while any work in the distant future is at a higher level milestone kind of format with lots of assumptions. Progressive elaboration is what occurs in the rolling wave planning process. Progressive elaboration simply means that over time we elaborate on the work packages in greater detail. Progressive elaboration means that as time passes we will have planned to provide that missing, more elaborate detail for the work packages as they appear on the schedule's horizon. This approach iteratively plans for a project as it unfolds, similar to the techniques used in agile software development. The concepts of rolling wave planning and progressive elaboration are techniques discussed in the PMBOK guide, and they describe how a project management plan, and also in this case here in project time management, a schedule evolves. This approach is over time elaborating in greater detail as the project moves forward and more information is available. Rolling wave planning and progressive elaboration acknowledges that we can see more clearly what is in close proximity, but looking further ahead, well, that's less clear. Rolling wave planning is a multi-step intermittent process, like waves, because we cannot provide the details very far out in planning. Depending upon the project length and complexity, we may be able to plan as much as a few weeks or months in advance with a fair amount of clarity. This involves creating a detailed, well-defined WBS for that period of clarity, but only highlighting the milestones for the rest of the project that is farther out. Our third and final tool and technique in the define activities process here is expert judgment. And one of the first questions that you should ask in any project is, who has done this before? The answer leads you to the experts, who can then share their expert judgment. Expert judgment is one of those tools and techniques that we use again and again throughout any project. No wonder it's also used here, because who better to ask about any activities than the experts? We looked at that earlier on already. Experts are people who have past knowledge in developing detailed scope statements, WBS and schedules for the type of project that you may be working on. They are a great resource when it comes to defining activities, so be sure to use them. As we look at the outputs of the define activities process, remember that this is not something that you do at a given point in time. You should not think that on Tuesday I will create the outputs of define activities. No. This is something that happens over time as you apply the tools and techniques of this process to your inputs. You will begin and continuously create the following three outputs: the activity list, the activity attributes, and of course also the milestone list. Let's take a look at the details here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are almost there. Only a few more items remain, and then you will know all there is to know about the define activities process. So, what would you say is the primary output of the define activities process? Well, that would be the activities themselves, of course. And where would you list these activities? Well, in the activity list, of course. See, this PMP stuff can be pretty easy sometimes. Remember, the activity list is considered complete when it contains all the activities that are required on the project and does not contain any activities that are not needed for executing the project. So your activity list has to be complete and tell you everything that you have to be working on your project. And here are 4 reasons why this activity list has to be complete. First of all, if you inadvertently include unneeded activities or you have forgotten any activities, you risk being unable to estimate accurately the cost on your project or the time on your project. Or we're talking about rolling wave planning here. Let's say we've created an activity list for the next 3 months, so we'll be unable to accurately estimate the project for the next 3 months. We know that after 3 months we can't accurately estimate it, rolling wave planning approach, but for the next 3 months we want an accurate estimate. If we aren't able to accurately estimate our project, well, we can't create an accurate project schedule. It might take 3.5 months. It might take 4 months. How do we know our activity list wasn't complete? Well, we will not be able to produce the deliverables correctly. We've taken our scope, the work breakdown structure, we've broken it down into, well, a few activities, probably not enough to produce all of this. Well, we can't produce the deliverables if our activity list isn't complete. It's like, forgetting 10 steps in a cooking recipe. And of course, if we do all of this wrong, it means we won't be able to finish our project successfully at all. So let us examine the activities in the activity list. Each activity contains, first of all, a unique identifier, like a number, a letter or character that is assigned to the activities. How you identify the individual activities is based heavily on your project conditions, on your organizational process assets, on your enterprise environmental factors. Those may describe what type of numbering system, what type of unique identifier you use. Nonetheless, the identifier selected needs some sort of way to track an activity and marks its progress and completion. Then next, we need also a scope of work description. This will explain to the team members what this activity means. The more precise and measurable you are in your scope of work description, the better you may be able to clarify any misunderstandings. This scope of work description describes what it's all about and what we're going to do here. For instance, describing an activity as lay 500 meters of secure fiber optic network cable between the West Wing and the Oval Office with minimal interruption is more precise than lay a network cable in the White House. Activities need additional detail, and we call this detail the activity attributes. These attributes, they can vary, but commonly attributes are things like predecessor and successor information. Of course, at this stage in the game where we haven't gone through activity sequencing yet, this is more sort of an initial information. Yeah, we know activity A comes before activity B, or C should come after D, even though we numbered them in this way. So there is some predecessor and successor information included. We have logical relationships like predecessor and successor activities. It's determining where connections and dependencies may lie between the activities that we are describing. Resources and resource constraints, also an important activity attribute. Naturally, the activity must be worked on. There is to be a resource or resources assigned to it, whether this is a human resource or material or a machine. And with that, there are constraints, such as an activity is to be done with a certain skill set, or it must be done by using union labor workers. Along with the resources, an attribute could be the person or persons who are responsible. They could be the one doing the task or the one owning it. There could be a level of effort, which is how much effort is expected to complete the activity depending on the person and their skill level doing the work. There could be an agreement on procurement details. For instance, if there were contractual elements either on the project as a whole or for portions of the project that we have procured. There could be discussions of the geographical area or similar categorization. For instance, are some of the activities to be completed on premise and others have to be completed off-site? And to end our list, possibly imposed dates are also mentioned as activity attributes. These constrain when an activity may or may not be worked on. The activity attributes are the specific components of a particular activity and are usually added over time as more and more information about our schedule activities becomes available. In the beginning, here in this process, these are typically descriptive factors related to the activity, but they can also describe activities that will become more relevant later in the project timeline. And the final output of the Define Activities process is the milestones list. And the name really says it all. It's a list of all milestones that you have identified and are trying to achieve. A milestone is any event in the timeline of the schedule that receives special attention, like the completion of a key deliverable. In addition to signaling the completion of a key deliverable, a milestone may also signify an important decision or a critical piece of information that may affect the future of a project. Just like when you are traveling, a milestone not only signifies the distance you have traveled, but also indicates your direction of travel, since key decisions are made at milestones and they may alter your route through the project plan. Well, we have come close to the end of the Define Activities lesson here, but there is one thing that you should never forget as you manage your time and the schedule on your project, and this is the following humorous project management quote. The sooner you get behind schedule, the more time you have to make it up. Remember, take the time and really define your activities. That way you know what you must do in order to be successful on your project. I have a very good friend who is a carpenter in the construction industry. Well, he's my dad, really. And he likes to put it this way: measure twice, cut once. Let's review. In the Define Activities process, we take the scope baseline, which consists of the project scope statement, the deliverables-oriented WBS, and the WBS dictionary, and we define what activities are necessary to create the project's deliverables. We do this by decomposing the work packages from the WBS into actual activities. We identify all the activities necessary to produce the deliverables, and we document this in the activity list and add activity attributes. It's really quite that simple. One last thing before we go. Let me ask you this. Have you started practicing for your PMP exam yet? And how many test questions have you already taken? It's my experience that the more sample questions you answer, the better your chances will be of passing the exam. And the best way to practice for your exam is, of course, if you use a commercial simulator. You should take at least 3 complete exams before your actual exam date. And by complete, I really mean that each of these exams should be 4 hours in duration and contain 200 professionally created questions. And while it's okay to whip out your smartphone or tablet while you're waiting at the post office or at the doctor's, and you have 15 minutes time to waste and you answer a few questions there, this is not a proper way to prepare for the exam. This is because during your real PMP exam, you will be sitting at a real desk. You'll have a real screen in front of you and there'll be a real keyboard and, yes, a real mouse. And that is what I want you to practice as well. Yes, I want you to be sitting down in front of your computer for each of those 4-hour exams before you take the real exam. I want you to do this properly. So you can see from this tip that the self-assessment questions that you get as part of the Project Management Prepcast, they're really not enough for proper preparation. They're okay to test yourself quickly after watching all the lessons in a knowledge area, but they are just a basic checkpoint for you to see how well you retained the main points for each of the lessons. You need to use a commercially available exam simulator. And of course, we recommend our very own PM Exam Simulator at pmexamsimulator.com. This one has 1,800 questions with which you can test yourself, and so it's not just 3, but it's 9 exams that you can have ahead of you. This simulator, by the way, is also available as a free version, and you can find that at free.pmexamsimulator.com. As part of this free version, we'll also give you a simulator comparison worksheet, because we're not saying ours is the best, we're just saying we're recommending ours, but you may choose a different one. So this exam simulator comparison worksheet that you get with the free one allows you to compare the features of many available simulators out there against each other, so you can make an educated buying decision. But no matter which simulator you decide to purchase, please take at least 3 complete exams with 200 questions each before going to your real exam. And this concludes our look into the Define Activities process, which means it's now time for Justine to say,
Happy trails to you.
and I'll give you my usual, until next time.